prize, singing Old Ship. And at that time, he couldn't even make no kind of music.
For decades, the love story of Elvis Presley and Priscilla has fascinated the world. Their marriage appeared to be a fairy tale, yet it ended in heartbreak and mystery. Fans and historians have debated the true reasons why Priscilla walked away from the king of rock and roll. Hidden within the Presley family was a voice that witnessed the triumphs and the struggles more closely than anyone else. That voice belonged to Vernon Presley. In his final reflections, he offered startling insight that reshaped the story we thought we knew. What did Vernon reveal about the collapse of this famous marriage, and why does it still matter today? The answers lie in his last words that echo with truth and pain. The mystery of a marriage. The story of Elvis Presley and Priscilla is one that has lived in whispers, photographs, and memories for more than half a century. To the public, their marriage looked like a living dream, the kind of romance that belonged to the pages of a storybook. The king of rock and roll had chosen a beautiful young woman who seemed destined to be at his side. The cameras adored them, the fans celebrated them, and magazines printed their faces as the perfect couple. Yet behind the shimmering surface, there was another story quietly taking shape. A story filled with shadows that could not be seen by the thousands who cheered Elvis on stage or by the millions who bought his records. When Elvis met Priscilla, she was a young girl caught between innocence and the promises of a glamorous world. Their connection was immediate, filled with both charm and pressure. She was swept into a life that many could only imagine but few could endure. To live in the orbit of Elvis Presley meant stepping into a world of constant music, constant eyes, and constant weight of expectations. Priscilla became not just a wife, but a symbol, and that symbol carried its own burden. As their marriage began, the world celebrated. Graceland turned into a palace that seemed to glow brighter than ever. Yet even on the day of their wedding, a quiet mystery surrounded their union. Were they in love in the way most couples dream of? Or were they bound together by the forces of fame and the expectations of an empire that stretched far beyond themselves? Friends whispered, the press speculated, and fans only saw what they were allowed to see. Inside the gates of Graceland, life moved to another rhythm, one that would test them in ways unseen by the public eye. Elvis was adored by countless admirers and surrounded by a lifestyle that few men in history have ever experienced. Priscilla found herself both enchanted and isolated. She had the gowns, the spotlight, and the name that carried a weight heavier than gold. Yet with each passing day, the perfect marriage appeared less perfect. Tension grew in the small details. The long nights waiting for Elvis to return home, the phone calls that ended abruptly, the moments when she wondered whether she had married a man or an entire legend. What made their marriage a mystery was not only what happened between them, but also what was left unsaid. Behind every smile at a public appearance was a question of what lingered in private. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, observed much of this from close by. He saw the public joy and the private silence, the laughter that rang out on some days and the loneliness that crept in on others. Even he admitted that their marriage carried a mystery too deep for outsiders to understand. In the beginning, hope seemed stronger than doubt. Priscilla believed in the love she felt. Elvis clung to the vision of home and family, and together they presented the world with an image of romance. Yet time would reveal that what looked unshakable from the outside was already fragile within. The mystery of their marriage was not about whether they loved each other, but whether love alone could survive the weight of fame, temptation, and the secrets that lingered in the halls of Graceland. Young love and early pressures. The love story between Elvis Presley and Priscilla Beaulieu began when she was only a teenager living in Germany with her family. Elvis was stationed there during his military service, already a rising star with the weight of fame pressing on his shoulders. Priscilla was just 14 years old when she first met him, a young girl with bright eyes and dreams too big to be contained in a quiet household. Elvis was drawn to her innocence, her softness, and the way she seemed untouched by the harsh spotlight that followed him everywhere. For Priscilla, the attraction was overwhelming. He was larger than life, a man who carried both charm and an aura of destiny. At first, their relationship seemed improbable, even impossible. Elvis was already a cultural icon while Priscilla was still discovering herself. Yet love has its own logic, and theirs grew in secret moments, whispered conversations and promises exchanged when the world was not watching. For Priscilla, the early years were intoxicating. Elvis treated her as someone special, someone who could offer him refuge from the madness of adoring fans and relentless obligations. She believed she had found not only a partner, but also a place within the great unfolding story of his life. But from the very beginning, pressure shaped their love. Priscilla's parents worried about the age difference and the kind of life their daughter was stepping into. They wondered whether Elvis, with his fame and temptations, could ever truly commit to her. Elvis himself struggled with the dual identity of being both a global sensation and a man searching for companionship. When he returned to America, distance became another challenge. Letters, phone calls, and short visits tried to bridge the gap, but the demands of his career left little space for ordinary courtship. Eventually, Priscilla was brought into the world of Elvis more fully, leaving behind the life she knew. By then, she was older but still young, still forming her sense of self. To the outside world, it appeared as though she had stepped into a fairy tale, yet the reality was far more complicated. Elvis expected loyalty, patience, and understanding. Priscilla was asked to wait through long tours, to accept his absences, and to carry herself with the poise of a wife even before marriage had taken place. The pressures were not only emotional, but also personal. Elvis had a vision of what he wanted Priscilla to become. He influenced her style, her makeup, even the way she presented herself in public. She transformed into the image that matched the life of the king, and while part of her embraced the glamour, another part felt the quiet loss of her own identity. These were sacrifices she made for love, believing that the bond they shared would be strong enough to justify the changes. Young love can be powerful, but it is also fragile. For Elvis and Priscilla, it was a love touched by tenderness and shadowed by expectation. They were not just two people discovering each other, they were two souls already carrying the weight of fame, scrutiny, and destiny. What began as a simple attraction quickly became a relationship burdened with responsibility far beyond their years. It was beautiful, it was difficult, and it was the beginning of a story that the world still remembers with both admiration and sorrow. Life at Graceland, a golden cage. Graceland was more than a home. To the world, it was a palace, a symbol of everything Elvis Presley represented. Fans lined the gates, hoping for a glimpse of the king. Reporters lingered nearby, eager for a headline. Tourists pointed at the sprawling white columns as if they were staring at a monument rather than a private residence. For Priscilla, moving into Graceland felt like stepping into a dream spun from wealth and wonder. She was surrounded by luxury. Rooms glittered with ornate furnishings, walls echoed with music, and a constant stream of visitors reminded her that this was not just a house, it was an empire. At first, the grandeur thrilled her. She could walk down hallways that seemed endless, sit in rooms where the most famous voices of the time gathered, and host gatherings that few women her age could ever imagine. She had closets filled with elegant clothes, jewels that sparkled under chandeliers, and the recognition that came with being Mrs. Presley. Yet as the days turned into months, she began to feel a weight pressing on her. The very palace that enchanted her was also a fortress that closed her off from the world outside. Life at Graceland was not ordinary life. Every movement was watched, every decision influenced by the reality of Elvis's fame. Privacy was scarce. Friends had to be carefully chosen. Outings were limited. Even conversations carried the unspoken awareness that nothing in this home belonged only to them. The walls of Graceland kept fans out, but they also kept Priscilla in. She once described it as living in a golden cage, beautiful yet confining, adorned yet suffocating. Inside those walls, she struggled with isolation. Elvis's schedule was unpredictable. Nights stretched long when he was away, rehearsing, performing, or surrounded by his inner circle. Days passed in silence as she wandered the vast estate with little company. She missed the freedom of walking in public without eyes following her. She missed the simplicity of being unknown. Graceland gave her everything she could wear, touch, or display, but it did not give her peace. Elvis loved his home and believed it was a sanctuary. To him, Graceland was a castle where he could escape from the world, a place to gather friends, make music, and rest. He wanted Priscilla to share that vision, to see it as the heart of their life together. And in many ways, she did. She respected the dream he had built, and she honored the role she played within it. But deep down, she wondered if she belonged to Graceland, or if Graceland belonged to her. Every marriage has challenges, but few are tested by the weight of fame and the walls of a mansion. The public saw a fairy tale home. Priscilla lived the reality of its silence. She smiled at parties, welcomed guests, and wore the gowns expected of her. Yet she also knew the quiet truth, that the golden cage, no matter how stunning, could never substitute for genuine connection and freedom. Graceland was her home, but it was also her prison, and that paradox would shape the course of her marriage to Elvis in ways neither of them fully understood at the time. Temptations and turmoil. Fame is both a crown and a curse, and for Elvis Presley, it was a reality that shaped every part of his life. On stage, he was untouchable, a performer whose voice and presence stirred thousands into frenzy. Women screamed his name, reached for his hand, and dreamed of a moment alone with him. Off-stage, those same admirers often found their way into his private life. For Priscilla, watching her husband adored by millions was both a source of pride and a slow-burning wound. She knew Elvis loved her in his own way, but she also knew he was a man constantly surrounded by temptation. Life on the road became a cycle of concerts, parties, and encounters that Priscilla could never fully control. Rumors of affairs drifted back to Graceland like shadows through the gates. Some were exaggerated by the press, but others carried more weight. Elvis had a charm that few women could resist, and he did not always turn away. Each whisper cut into Priscilla's sense of security. She smiled in public, kept her dignity, and carried the title of Mrs. Presley. Yet behind closed doors, her heart often questioned whether her love was enough to compete with the endless attention Elvis received. The turmoil was not only about other women. Elvis lived under pressures that few could imagine. The demands of his career were relentless. Managers pushed for tours, record labels demanded hits, and Hollywood called for films that sometimes drained his spirit. To cope, Elvis leaned on habits that slowly weighed him down. Pills to sleep, pills to wake, and moments of escape that Priscilla struggled to understand became part of their life together. His restlessness translated into unpredictable moods, long absences, and late-night arguments that left her feeling alone even when he was home. Priscilla's struggle was intensified by her own youth. She had entered this marriage still discovering who she was. While she loved Elvis deeply, she also longed for a life where she could find her own identity. Surrounded by the glamour of Graceland and the chaos of stardom, she often felt like an actress cast in a role she had not chosen. Temptation and turmoil were not limited to Elvis. She too began to feel drawn toward experiences beyond the golden cage, seeking freedom, friendship, and even affection elsewhere. These inner battles created cracks in the marriage that widened as years passed. To the outside world, the Presleys remained iconic. Their photos adorned magazines, their appearances were celebrated, and their smiles looked genuine. Few realized the tension simmering underneath. Vernon Presley, who observed his son and daughter-in-law closely, later reflected that the pressures of fame, temptation, and unmet needs became forces too powerful to resist. Elvis and Priscilla were not ordinary husband and wife. They were a legend, and his young bride was trying to hold on while the world pulled them apart. The story of their marriage was written not only in love but in struggle. Temptations followed Elvis wherever he went, and turmoil followed Priscilla wherever she stayed. What had begun as a fairy tale was slowly shifting into something more fragile, a union tested by forces larger than either of them could control. Vernon Presley's unique viewpoint. Every great story is remembered not only by those who lived it, but also by those who watched it unfold from close by. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, carried a perspective unlike any other. He had seen his son rise from humble beginnings in Tupelo to the dazzling heights of superstardom. He had walked with Elvis through poverty, sacrifice, and dreams that once seemed impossible. When Elvis married Priscilla, Vernon observed with both pride and quiet concern. He wanted happiness for his son, but he also understood that a life built under the bright glare of fame would never be simple. Vernon lived at Graceland and often shared the rhythms of daily life with his son and daughter-in-law. He noticed the small details that others overlooked. He saw Priscilla's quiet expressions when Elvis left for another tour. He heard the laughter during family gatherings, but also sensed the silence afterward when Elvis disappeared into his own world. Vernon loved Priscilla as a daughter, yet he also felt the tension that rested in her smile. He knew that beneath the glamour, cracks were forming. As a father, Vernon sympathized with Elvis. He recognized the burden of fame that weighed heavily on his son. The pressure to perform, the temptation of women, and the constant demands of managers drained Elvis's strength. Vernon defended him at times, explaining that few men could resist the life presented to him. Yet as a man, Vernon also saw Priscilla's side. He understood that no woman, no matter how devoted, could endure endless loneliness without eventually breaking. Vernon's reflections often carried a tone of inevitability. He once said that he believed Elvis and Priscilla loved each other, but that love alone could not survive the forces surrounding them. He saw how Elvis wanted a faithful wife at home while still living the life of a global idol. He saw how Priscilla longed for companionship and individuality in a world where she was expected to remain silent. To Vernon, the marriage was like a rope pulled tightly from both ends, stretched by expectations and strained by reality. In his later years, Vernon spoke with unusual honesty about what he had witnessed. He did not blame Priscilla for leaving, nor did he excuse Elvis completely. Instead, he admitted that the life they shared was simply too heavy for two young hearts to carry. Vernon understood that his son needed love, stability, and loyalty, but he also understood that Priscilla needed freedom, growth, and dignity. Neither could provide everything the other required, not because they lacked love, but because the world around them demanded too much. Vernon's unique viewpoint remains invaluable because it strips away the illusions of gossip and speculation. He was there in the rooms where silence hung heavier than conversation. He was there when Elvis's triumphs brought joy but also distance. He was there when Priscilla's quiet strength began to turn into quiet sorrow. His last words about their marriage carried both sadness and acceptance, offering a glimpse into the truth that only a father could share. The breaking point. Why Priscilla left. Every relationship has its limits, and for Priscilla Presley, the breaking point came after years of waiting, watching, and enduring. She had entered the marriage believing in the power of love, willing to sacrifice her own youth to stand by Elvis. She carried the grace of a devoted wife, smiled for the cameras, and supported him through the storms of fame. But beneath the polished surface, her heart grew weary. Love alone was no longer enough to sustain her spirit. The breaking point did not arrive in a single dramatic moment, but rather in a series of quiet realizations that built over time. Priscilla had long felt the loneliness of Graceland. Nights stretched endlessly as Elvis traveled, surrounded by his entourage or immersed in his demanding schedule. She yearned for simple companionship, for evenings where they could talk as husband and wife without the weight of expectation pressing between them. When those moments became rare, she began to ask herself whether she truly belonged in the life she had chosen. Loneliness hardened into longing, and longing eventually turned into a determination to reclaim her own identity. The rumors of Elvis's affairs were no longer whispers, but truths she could not ignore. Each headline, each phone call, each absence carried with it the ache of betrayal. She forgave many times, hoping that her love would bring him back fully to her, but the cycle repeated itself. The man who once represented refuge had become a source of pain. She still loved him, but love without trust became a chain she could not bear. That realization marked a turning point in her heart. Priscilla also felt the weight of losing herself. Elvis had shaped much of her appearance, her style, even her behavior. While she once embraced those changes as acts of devotion, over time they began to feel like erasures of her true self. She wanted to grow as a woman, to pursue her own dreams, and to stand on her own without always being defined by the name Presley. The more she searched for her individuality, the more she recognized that it could not flourish inside the golden cage of Graceland. There was also another reality. Priscilla found affection elsewhere, a connection that reminded her she was still alive, still capable of being desired and understood beyond her role as Elvis's wife. That experience did not erase her love for him, but confirmed her need for something more than what their marriage offered. It gave her the courage to step out of the shadows and seek a life that was her own. When she finally chose to leave, it was not done in anger, but in clarity. She walked away not because she hated Elvis, but because she could no longer deny herself the chance to live fully. Their divorce shocked the world, but for those who truly understood, it was the natural outcome of years of tension. Priscilla's breaking point was not a moment of weakness, but a moment of strength. She left because she realized that sometimes love means letting go, even of a legend. Vernon Presley's last words. As the father of Elvis Presley, Vernon carried both pride and sorrow that few men could comprehend. He had watched his son rise from obscurity to become the most famous entertainer in the world. He had also witnessed the toll that kind of life demanded. When the marriage between Elvis and Priscilla finally ended, Vernon understood more than anyone outside their gates why it had happened. In his later years, he spoke with a voice softened by time, revealing truths that had remained hidden. His last words on the matter became a window into the heart of the Presley family. Vernon never pretended that Elvis was perfect. He loved his son deeply, but he acknowledged that fame had shaped Elvis into someone the world adored, yet also someone impossible to live with. Vernon recalled how Elvis longed for stability, for the devotion of a wife who would wait for him at Graceland, but also sought the attention and admiration of countless others. He explained that Elvis wanted two worlds at once, the world of family and the world of stardom, and those worlds could never fully coexist. He also spoke tenderly of Priscilla. Vernon admired her patience, her dignity, and her willingness to adapt to a life she never truly chose. He knew she had given her youth to Elvis, raising their daughter and holding their home together when fame and temptation threatened to tear it apart. In his last reflections, Vernon admitted that Priscilla had been more than a wife. She had been an anchor during the stormiest years of Elvis's career. Yet he also confessed that no anchor could hold forever against the weight of fame and the choices Elvis made. Vernon's honesty carried no bitterness. He did not condemn Elvis for his flaws, nor did he judge Priscilla for leaving. Instead, his words revealed acceptance. He described their love as real but fragile, a flame that burned brightly yet could not survive the winds that surrounded it. He believed Priscilla left not because she stopped loving Elvis, but because she needed to save herself. Vernon recognized that her decision was not betrayal, but survival. In those final conversations, Vernon offered a perspective that no outsider could give. He had lived inside the walls of Graceland, heard the arguments, felt the silence, and seen the tears. He knew that the marriage collapsed not from a lack of love, but from too much pressure, too many temptations, and too little freedom. His last words on the subject revealed a man who, even in his grief, understood that both Elvis and Priscilla were victims of a world larger than themselves. When Vernon passed away, those words became part of the Presley legacy. They added depth to a story often told in rumors and speculation. More than gossip or headlines, his reflections carried the weight of truth spoken by a father who loved his son and respected the woman who once shared his life. In remembering their story, Vernon's voice remains the final testimony, one that honors love even in its collapse. Aftermath: life beyond divorce. When the divorce between Elvis and Priscilla was finalized in 1973, the world gasped in disbelief. To many fans, their marriage had been the ultimate fairy tale. To see it end so publicly felt like the closing of a chapter in the great story of American music and romance. Yet for Elvis and Priscilla, the separation was not the end of their lives, but the beginning of two separate journeys that would redefine who they were outside of their marriage. Priscilla stepped into life beyond Graceland with both fear and determination. For the first time in years, she was free to shape her identity without being bound to the role of Mrs. Presley. She explored opportunities that had long been denied to her. She pursued acting and business ventures and eventually became a strong guardian of Elvis's legacy after his death. Most importantly, she embraced her role as a mother to Lisa Marie, determined to give her daughter a sense of stability even as the world continued to treat them as extensions of Elvis's legend. Priscilla's transformation was not immediate. There were moments of doubt, moments of loneliness, and the constant reminder that her name would always be linked to the king of rock and roll. But in that reality, she also found strength. She proved to herself and to the world that she was more than a symbol. She became a woman with her own voice, her own choices, and her own life. For Elvis, life after divorce was more complicated. He continued to perform, still adored by millions, but those who knew him recognized the loneliness behind the applause. He never fully recovered from the loss of family life, and his health began to decline under the pressures of touring, fame, and personal struggles. Though he and Priscilla were no longer husband and wife, they maintained a unique bond. She remained a trusted friend and confidant, someone who understood him in ways few others ever could. Their continued closeness revealed that love had not vanished entirely. It had simply transformed. Vernon Presley watched both his son and former daughter-in-law adjust to life beyond divorce. He saw Elvis wrestle with the emptiness of nights on the road, and he saw Priscilla grow stronger as she embraced independence. As a father, he carried both pride and sorrow, recognizing that the marriage had collapsed, but that the people involved were still finding their way. The aftermath of the divorce reshaped the Presley legacy. It showed that even legends are human, that even the most celebrated love stories can fracture under pressure. Yet it also revealed resilience. Priscilla built a life of dignity and purpose. Elvis continued to share his music with the world, leaving a legacy that outlived him. Their daughter carried forward the bond of both parents, a living reminder that from brokenness can still come connection. Life beyond divorce did not erase the pain, but it allowed growth. It gave Priscilla the freedom she needed, and Elvis the space to face his struggles. For the Presley family, it marked both an ending and a beginning, proving that even after heartbreak, life continues with new chapters yet to be written. Closing reflections: love, loss, and legacy. Every story eventually reaches its conclusion, and the tale of Elvis and Priscilla Presley is no exception. Their marriage began with the wonder of young love, unfolded under the brilliance and burden of fame, and ended with heartbreak that echoed far beyond the walls of Graceland. Yet in reflecting on their journey, one cannot help but see more than failure. Their story is a portrait of love tested by forces too great for any two people to withstand. It is a reminder that even legends bleed, and even icons long for ordinary happiness. In the end, Elvis remained the king of rock and roll, adored by millions. But privately, he wrestled with the loneliness of choices that had distanced him from the woman he once promised forever to. His songs carried the weight of emotion, but his nights carried silence. Priscilla, though no longer his wife, continued to care for him, showing that love can change form without disappearing. Their bond was not erased by divorce. It simply transformed into something different, a quiet respect and enduring connection that endured until his death. Priscilla's strength became her legacy. She rebuilt her life, proving that she was more than the shadow of a superstar. She became a businesswoman, an actress, and a mother who gave her daughter as much stability as she could. She also became the steward of Elvis's memory, ensuring that his music, his image, and his humanity would never fade into history. In doing so, she turned personal pain into a mission that honored the man she once loved and the father of her child. Vernon Presley's final words bring clarity to their story. He reminded the world that neither Elvis nor Priscilla was at fault alone. Their marriage was crushed beneath the weight of fame, temptation, and expectations too heavy for anyone to bear. He recognized that they loved each other, but he also understood that love cannot thrive when freedom and trust are missing. His perspective, offered without bitterness, is a gift. It allows us to see Elvis and Priscilla not as symbols of scandal, but as human beings who tried, failed, and yet still loved in their own way. The legacy of their union is not simply in its collapse, but in what it reveals about resilience. Elvis left behind music that continues to stir hearts across generations. Priscilla built a life that proved she was more than a wife in a golden cage. Their daughter carried both of their spirits forward, binding them together long after papers declared them apart. Theirs is a story of love and loss, but also of transformation and survival. As we close this chapter, the lesson is clear. Fairy tales do not always last forever, but that does not mean they were not real. Elvis and Priscilla's love was genuine, even if it was fragile. Their story continues to fascinate because it is not only about a superstar and his bride. It is about the universal truth that love, though powerful, sometimes cannot withstand the storms of life. Yet from that loss comes legacy, a legacy that endures in memory, in music, and in the voices that still sing their names. The story of Elvis and Priscilla Presley is more than a tale of love and divorce. It is a mirror reflecting the power of fame, the fragility of the human heart, and the enduring weight of legacy. Vernon Presley's last words strip away rumor and reveal truth, showing us that even legends are vulnerable to the storms of life. Their journey was filled with beauty and heartbreak, yet from it emerges a lesson of resilience, identity, and the price of living under a spotlight that never dims. If their story moved you, stay with us for more untold revelations, hidden histories, and powerful voices from the past that continue to shape how we see love, loss, and legacy today.